to welcome you to our program today. Our special guest is Tony Gael, and Tony is an inspirational speaker. He does workshops and seminars. He's an author, and he's done such things and teachings such as self-esteem versus God esteem. But today he's going to be more specifically talking about a subject that sometimes is not so a very easy subject. It's a subject that sometimes it's not easy for people to talk about because they don't always understand it. But yet sometimes when we struggle with this ourselves, or we have relatives and friends who struggle with it, sometimes we can feel so alone, and that has to do with mental illness. And so that's why I'm so very excited about this program, is because Tony is going to talk about that. And as he talks about it, hopefully that allows us all just to be able to talk about it more, not to be afraid to talk about this subject. And as we do, that we learn more about each other and just what kinds of treatment methods are out there and what support can be given. And so Tony, God bless you. Thank you so much for being on today, and
Thank you.
And that you're willing to come and talk about some pretty difficult or tough stuff, okay? And that would be, dealing with mental illness. And so, I don't know, as we begin, I think about C.S. Lewis. That he was such a great theologian who, addressed a lot of things, but then he dealt with some things himself, the death of his wife and in dealing with the grief of all that, but then also, this whole idea of God and suffering and healing. And when it comes to mental illness, that he, recognized within society that it's not such an easy subject to address or to see, what is out there, as far as support and so forth, where, it's easier to talk about a toothache, he says, to bring that subject up, to say my tooth is hurting, rather than to talk about a broken heart that is hurting. So, Tony, let us know a little bit about, what brings us to the subject today, and you personally, to where, you being, having such a ministry of getting out and doing workshops on various things, but that you also have the courage to be able to address this.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to start off with some statistics. I've got my cheat sheet here, and these are mental illness stats, and they're pretty recent. I try to go with the most recent stuff that I can find, but there are 200 behaviors that can be classified as a mental illness, which makes it very difficult to understand and diagnose with so many out there. 54% in the U.S. struggle with some sort of mental illness every year. 1 in 4 pastors struggle with a mental illness. And it's interesting, they struggle with it many times, if not most times, by themselves, because they're scared that they're either going to get fired, or at some point in time, you look for a different thing, and when you got that label of mentally ill, makes it really difficult. But on the good thing about the church, somewhere around 68% of people who've been interviewed, Christians, have had a positive view with their churches. Only 10% have left a local church that they belong to, and only 3 that left the church, Big C church, permanently. So, you're talking about taboo, and it's becoming less and less once you understand some of these.
Well, it's good that people are starting to accept this more and more, just being able to talk about it. And also, I think you kind of touched on that, maybe people aren't being so judgmental anymore as they are, just having now more of a compassionate heart to say, well, I'm not here to judge my neighbor, I'm here to want to see what can I do to be your brother or sister in Christ that walks with you in this.
Yeah, and in my case, I've got bipolar disorder and general anxiety. I've also got multiple sclerosis, which they're finding out that multiple sclerosis and bipolar disorder might be a link to that, which is interesting, because with chronic illness, you know, you struggle with depression, and so I take medicine for the depression from the MS, and then I also take some medicine for my bipolar and general anxiety. And I look at it as far as taking medication that God gave creative people. He gave us different plants, different ways of making medicine, and I'm thankful every single day that I get to take the medication that I do. Because when I was pre-diagnosed, or before I was diagnosed, my life became very, very difficult.
Yeah. What a blessing it is that we have, you know, pharmaceuticals and, you know, and medicines and so forth to take to give us some relief. And, you know, I know it was some mental illness that, because of medicine, that, you know, well, I think in certain cases like schizophrenia, that people
Right.
that where they were just pretty much X'd out of society
Yeah.
now are able to live a very productive life, you know, in society with it because of the medicines that
Yeah.
are available. But when you were reading those statistics, that's pretty high statistics. And so when you think about if a person themselves are not suffering from mental illness, or, you know, this here again, you mentioned like there's approximately 200, you know, various behaviors that can fall under this umbrella. But generally we're dealing with somebody who's very close to us, who is. And so that's where we have compassion to say, well, what can we do to help? You know, sometimes we feel like we're in such a frustrating point or a frustrating place to be able to help somebody, you know, that certainly needs, you know, some support and help. And where do we go? Where do we turn? And you know, so that's so important that, you know, the door is being opened, and now we're trying to get it open even further to say, let's address these things. Let's see what resources are out there, what help's available.
Yeah, it's also interesting that the two most sought after as far as help with mental illness, and this is not just the church, this is society as a whole. They'll call two people, one of two people, usually the police or a pastor. And I think with the pastor, we've become so much better. Like down in Cedar Rapids, we've got Keys to Living counseling. And so I think that the more people are diagnosed and more understood, the resources from the church can be such a help. And just not having that feeling of, I have to keep this private. You know, I can't let anybody know, because it's a temptation, but it's not something that people with mental illness, I don't think we should be ashamed or shamed into not, you know, saying anything about it.
Well, like for instance, if a person breaks their leg, you know, in some cases that's almost like it's, you know, something that's almost heroic about it. Just, how did you break your leg? Well, you know, I was doing this, and
can I sign your cast?
Yeah, and then can I sign the cast? And you know, it almost seems like it's an award kind of a thing. You know, but if you're dealing with some kind of a broken part of our person, you know, as far as our mentality goes, our mind, our psyche, that why is it so different? You know, why? You know, like you say, it's almost like, well, if I break my leg, should I somehow hide it? Or should I put it in a closet as people come over that they can't see, you know, what's going on with my leg? You know, that is. It's not like you probably have the answer to that, but yeah, I think that we all kind of sense that. If you have, you know, something wrong physically, you know, like a knee surgery, well, that's all. You know, we want to hear all about it. But if you're dealing with some kind of a mental illness, it's almost like, you know, we're a little bit on the frightened side, and it's just like, oh, we better not talk about that.
Well, and the media doesn't help, because anytime that there's a school shooting or a theater shooting or something like that, it's mental illness. But bipolar, for instance, there's only about 2.6% of the American, about society as a whole. And so when something like that happens, it's kind of frustrating because they're in such the small minority. And back to medicine, a lot of those people are really good and even for a while, but then they just don't take their medicine anymore. They believe that they're cured. And to be living a bipolar life, as far as an illustration, is like riding a roller coaster. We go up, and we just kind of get stuck there, and that would be the manic phase. The manic phase is the feeling that you can do anything that you want to. You're incredibly productive. You're the life of the party. Everybody likes your idea. I mean, it just, but on the bad side of that too, you've got so many thoughts in your head that are racing that you just almost just want to go, stop. But medically speaking, you can't. And when you go down, you get stuck down in the depressive side. What happens a lot with manics is they'll be manic for a couple of weeks, and they get that high feeling. But they don't sleep, and the body can only do so much for so long a period of time before it crashes, and that's what happens with the crash and the depression. And so it's not a fluid roller coaster like a lot of people experience. It's getting stuck on whether the high or the low.
Okay.
But also what makes it, and you were talking about family and friends, what makes it really difficult for them and your support network is you can be talking like me and you are, and then all of a sudden I become really irritated and start yelling, and you'd be looking around going, what was that? Where did that come from? And that's a classic bipolar extreme behavior that occurs.
Yeah. Yeah, so then that gets to be, something that is of concern not just for the person who's suffering, but then for everybody around. Like how do I, how do I understand this? The whole thing. And so that's where, So when we think of like bipolar disorder, that obviously it's not anything that you can help. It's not anything that, it's not wrong. It's not like, it's sinful or anything like that.
Though it will manifest itself in sinful behaviors.
Okay.
A lot of people with bipolar that they're not taking meds or haven't been diagnosed yet, extreme sexual behavior, extreme spending. Almost anything that God created, bipolar steps in and just wipes all that out. So you can have multiple partners, multiple affairs for sex, gambling, just spending money. Like you could go in, if you could afford it, you could go into a car shop and say, hey, I want that. And then you get home, you've not discussed it with anybody, and your wife and family are like, where did that come from? And they end up having to take it back to the dealer. And so you can kind of understand why, as a family member or a friend, why this is so confusing and scary.
Yeah, so it's just a lot of like impulsive behavior.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We all have thoughts in our heads, but before they leave our mouth, there's this guard.
Right.
With bipolar disorder, the guard goes somewhere else, but
Kind
it's
of the
down.
filter, so to speak.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so you know firsthand what it is to suffer with a mental illness like bipolar disorder, but you've also have taken an interest in in seeing, well, what's available out there, and you're willing to speak about this and to say that these are some of the things to look for. These are some of the things to that can be helpful. I mean, you obviously have quite a strong ministry to people. So why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I would recommend for people to go on my website, and there's a section on mental health, mental illness, and there are 13 different links to things that I have found useful, including 3 documentaries on the subject of bipolar or depression. But I think, and especially as a man, I think that I am able to give help and hope. I think men hide it more because, we're supposed to be, all this kind of stuff. And so when something like that happens, and it's just, once you start to know what the symptoms are, so I could, come and talk more in depth with the church group about this, but there are a lot of stuff on the internet that are really good. Not all of them are Christian, but they are really, really good. Like 13, one of them is 13 things that a friend or a family member can do to support somebody with MS. There's a documentary that is bipolar specific. So there's all kinds of resources out there. And I think when people listen, that they have that secure feeling, I'm not the only one. He struggles with it. And he's a Christian. He's got a Christian ministry. Kind of what's up with that sort of deal. So I think God's been able to use me to sort of push mental illness on the forefront. Because it affects, like I said, 54% of people this year are going to struggle with some sort of mental illness. And we can't hide it because that's dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. But a support network is huge in doing this.
Yeah, so one of the things that you mentioned that's so very important is just not denying it, but recognizing that this is something that we have, and that it's important to learn as much as we can about that, and understanding that there are resources, like for instance your website where you address this, but then you mentioned the internet now. It's just opened up the door to all kinds of resources, and then you're also mentioning the importance of a support network, so that you're not feeling so alone out there, but that there's others and that can be there with you in this whole thing, and we're all just trying to work together to get through this life, right?
Right. And I sat down one day and just started to jot down words, and there's far more words that are negative about mental illness than positive. These are the 6 I'm going to give you are the most important ones by far.
Okay.
And I call them my 6 C's: Christ, counseling, compassion, care, community, and courage. And if you've got those going for you, then it probably won't manifest itself so that other people, especially new people that they probably wouldn't even be able to tell. But you have to trust those people too. I trust my mom and my sister, brother-in-law, and a couple of friends. So when I start going up, they'll be able to kind of help me to put the brakes on.
Okay. Yeah,
but that's important because one of the stats I was going to share, 90%, and I checked this with 2 or 3 different sites, 90% of marriages involving at least one bipolar spouse will end in divorce.
Isn't that something?
Just think about that, 9 out of 10.
And what do you suppose that is?
It is, you've got spouses, and this was my case, you have spouses that feel abused to some extent because of the behavior, become really irritable. And so when if I'm in a manic and somebody's, telling me to stop, my initial reaction is, leave me alone.
Okay.
And that starts putting up walls all over the place. And if you don't know, and even if you do know, because with bipolar and some depressions, you can be playing with your meds for a couple of years before you get the right dosage, the right kind. And so you can still be struggling. It won't be as much, but you can still very much struggle with that. I am very fortunate in that the medicines I got on and the kinds and the amounts have worked, because I haven't had a real manic episode probably 3 years.
Okay.
So
Well, that's
you'd have to
that's
ask.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to ask my mom.
Yeah.
Should be able to tell you what that
really,
looks like.
that sounds like you have really developed, some kind of a consistency there as far as kind of leveling things off.
Yeah, and that's another good C word. I've sought out counsel from friends and from the Keys to Living Counseling Center in Cedar Rapids. You can't do it. You can't do this alone. I mean, you can't do life alone. You can't do this alone. There's just no way.
Yeah,
But
so
we
you
often
really need that
feel,
network of support.
yeah, because otherwise you feel like you've just been thrown away, and that can, I mean, that hurts. That hurts a lot. It's kind of understandable why family and friends would react, but it hurts too to feel that way.
But as I look at your life, you are certainly being proactive, and that you have taken your life situation and you are now using it to the glory of God and to the compassion and love of others, to help bring healing yourself to other people. And I think that is really quite a testimony for all of us to say that when life isn't going just maybe the way that we would like to because of a mental illness, to say that, well, we just don't huddle up in a shell or become bitter and angry, but rather take and channel all of this this energy or whatever it is that we are experiencing, this frustrations, and to say, well, no, I'm going to do something good with this. And so it's not so much why God, but what am I going to do with this now?
Right.
Or how are we going to use this?
Yep. I have found it helpful, and when people hear these names, they're kind of like, whoa. But the Bible's chocked full of people who struggled with depression, from Moses to Paul to Elijah, Job, Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, and there's more.
Well, Saul,
but that helps. Saul, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, he would be a classic mental illness. But we hold these people up like they do no wrong.
They never had a problem.
But, right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jeremiah is my favorite.
Yeah, that would be a case where he certainly, shared a lot about his own personal life and the difficulties of being a prophet, and just, his own personal life and the struggles. And I think Paul did the same thing as he, talked about a thorn in his flesh and things like that, or the things that he wants to do in life he fails to do, and the things that he that whole thing of being reactive or proactive in life. And I think of Romans chapter 7 and his struggle that he has with being a saint and a sinner, so to speak, at the same time. But okay, well, certainly, Tony, we certainly thank you for all of your information here and in your sharing. And so I just want people to know that Tony is willing to come and to speak, at your church or an organization, and say, well, this is a good way to kind of, talk about this, or maybe you already have a group and we're looking for a speaker that can come and speak. that Tony would be a good person to have come, and you call it One You Ministries, right?
Yeah. One you, one unique you, eternally made by God
Okay.
as a totally
Well, that's really good.
unique person.
And I see you even have a fingerprint there as,
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
symbol of that.
And no, it's not mine. I don't know whose it is.
Okay. Well, it's somebody's, but
That's right.
that's somebody who's unique. Yeah. All right. Well, we do have Tony's website information that if you'd like to follow him daily as far as his, the things that he posts on his social networks here, but also as we think about the various supports and the ways that we can get connected. I think Tony is a person who is very good, a person who can help do that, because here again, we don't want to feel alone in all of this. I think it's time that we get connected, and it's important that people do that, and the more that we do that, the more that we take care of ourselves, the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Christians, by the way, just really quick, are much more enabled to work through this than non-Christian counterparts. And I think it's all God. I really believe that.
The power of God working through our, working in our lives and through His people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then you got a little brochure here too that kind of shares a little bit about, some of the ministries and opportunities, and just dealing with bipolar, and so here, Tony is a very strong Christian man. He has gotten degrees from Christian colleges, and so he, certainly is a person that knows the Lord. He's got a strong faith, but he also suffers from bipolar disorder and also from multiple sclerosis, and so, but he shows that how, with God's help, we can overcome, and that God is, that He's the one. It's by faith He makes us well. Yeah. And so, well, Tony, thanks. What a delight to have you on here today.
Thank you very much.
Tony Gael. And God bless all of you this day as well.